Ukraine planned to swarm Moscow airports with AI-guided drones. Now that is a headline. You talk about taking a gamble, and it is hard to come up with a plausible one that would be bigger. And yet, this story gets more interesting. Where the plan came from, why it was allegedly called off, and, if we could put on our tinfoil hats for a second, why maybe this is all part of a bigger plan. So today, we will go over the details of the plot, ask whether it would have been effective, ask separately whether it would have been a good idea, investigate what this might tell us about some recent palace intrigue in Kyiv, and speculate on whether we may still see such an operation in the future. But let's begin with what we know about the alleged plot. The target was Russia's airports, particularly those around the city of Moscow. Ukraine would swarm them with small drones, something larger than quadcopters used during Operation Spiderweb, but still smaller than what has become common during the counter-logistics/oil refineries/wild berries campaigns. They would travel from Ukraine, overwhelm Russian air defenses, and bomb everything in sight. The project received the codename M&Ms, reflecting the quantity and the size of the drones. The main goal here was to make air travel around Russia infeasible, and go far beyond prior disruptions to air traffic control or temporary no-fly zones imposed to assist the Russian military's anti-aircraft fire. As we know all too well thanks to recent threats to international shipping, capital-intensive industries need insurance to operate. Once planes start becoming targets for bombs, insurance companies either start withdrawing their policies, or, alternatively, the policies do not cover an act of war anyway. In either case, the airlines protect their investments by moving the planes east. Or in the case of international airlines, they simply leave the country altogether. This last bit was particularly on the minds of Ukrainian war planners, who wanted to convince Turkish Airways and Emirates that Russia was not the best place to be doing business. Although months of planning had gone into the operation, it got put on the shelf when former Minister of Defense Mikhailo Fedorov was de facto fired from his post in July. And if you ask Ukraine about it, they will deny that the operation was ever planned. From here, we have a bunch of different facets of the operation to cover. But let's begin with the most basic of questions. Would it have been effective? And I think that the theme here should be one of caution. Would it have made major international headlines? Yes. It is safe to assume that the war media would have been eating good that day, again like in the aftermath of Spiderweb. Would it have been incredibly economically disruptive? Absolutely. With apologies for drawing this parallel, there is a reason that Bin Laden and company were so laser-focused on aviation. Airports are economic hubs, with industries from business to tourism relying on them to function properly. Destroying the industry is essentially a grief multiplier. That is why they kept going after the aviation industry, despite layer after layer of new security. Beyond those points, though, I am unsure about the utility here. The initial report on the alleged operation began with, quote, "Earlier this year, Ukrainian officials came to President Volodymyr Zelensky with a risky new plan to end the war with Russia." Now, I do not know whether this was the wording that the author chose, or if this was the assessment of the officials who leaked the information. Either way, we need to banish the common trope that this one simple trick will end the war. Unless the plan actually destroys the opposing military or decapitates the opponent's regime and guarantees that the next leader to come into office will recall the troops, that is not how this works. Operations provide leverage. They change the balance of power between parties and alter the anticipated costs of continuing. But whether they cause wars to end depends on complex interactions with bargaining frictions. Leverage is all the reason that you need to justify the operation. So let's leave the revelation of the operation at that, because alone it is plenty to justify its importance. Nonetheless, I think we ought to have realistic expectations about what this would do, both from the leverage and bargaining friction standpoint. So the theory went, disrupting airports would upset the country's oligarchs, who would then turn to Putin and force him to reconsider the war effort. Okay, fine, it will upset the oligarchs. Airports, especially in Russia, disproportionately cater to the upper class. But it is not like the upper class has been thrilled about this war from the start. Say it with me. The invasion is a wealth transfer from oligarchs to the Russian working class in pursuit of a Putin vanity project. And maybe they have gone along with it before, but we'll draw the line here. However, the oligarchs do not seem like the section of Russia that needs an attitude adjustment about the war. If the working class is benefiting from the war, then hurting them is the way to build a larger coalition against Putin. Disrupting gas station supply chains and blowing up Wildberries facilities will have a much greater effect on that than hitting aviation. Those caveats aside, I still have not articulated an argument that M&Ms would have been a bad idea. Creating general economic havoc inside of Russia is a good idea, even if it does not guarantee an end of the war. But there are some significant downside risks that would come along with it. One of the tricks to the operation is having all of the small drones hit their desired targets. This is not a simple task, especially when smaller drones mean smaller booms. For something like a Wildberries warehouse, Ukraine has GPS coordinates in mind, and knows both what the warehouse looks like and the path to it from satellite images. So you send your drones in. If they evade GPS jamming, great. If not, presumably they have AI targeting on board that will try its best to finish the job. The airport situation is more complicated. If all you are trying to do is destroy the concourse, then you could follow that template without issue. Two problems though. One, concourses are not flammable. Strike an oil refinery or warehouse full of cardboard boxes, and the target virtually lights itself on fire. Strike a concourse, and maybe you inflict some property damage. It will not be much more than that. To make matters worse, a tidy concourse is not necessary for an airport to function. You do not actually disable the target. Sure, you send a message, but anyone who does not want to listen to that message can still fly as they please. In turn, Ukraine would want to hit the planes themselves. Russia cannot fix that problem by simply flying in more planes, because this would sink the insurance side of things, presumably worse than if you simply struck the concourse. However, targeting planes adds a new level of complexity because they are not static GPS coordinates. The solution here is to use autonomous AI targeting. The AI systems know what planes look like, and so once they reach the airport, they begin looking for targets and start exploding accordingly. Here, though, is where we hit the second main problem with the strategy. These are civilian airports, and therefore there will be civilians shuffling through there. Hitting a concourse would likely cause some civilian casualties, though they would probably be few because the building would bear the brunt of the blast. Planes are a different story. They are not made of concrete, and they are full of jet fuel. Hit one full of passengers, and not all of them will make it out of the confined space. The way you might adjust for that risk is by observing a plane in question and looking for observable features of passengers being aboard versus them simply sitting on an empty tarmac. That is a simple enough problem for us as humans. But at this point, Ukraine would be relying on autonomous systems to make kill decisions. That is something that has not yet happened in the war at this scale. As a side comment here, and something that we will implicitly revisit at the end of this video as we discuss the possibility that Ukraine eventually executes this operation anyway. The easiest solution to this problem is to have Starlink communicate with the drones. That would keep a human in the loop all the way through the kill chain. As you know, though, Elon Musk is opposed to having Starlink participate in the war in this manner, and so that appears to not be an option currently. But imagine that Ukraine goes through with it anyway. Then you would have a situation where all parties would agree that having a human oversee the entire process is better. Or at least I think that Kyiv, the Kremlin, and Musk would rather see empty planes destroyed than planes full of people. But if Musk keeps that rule hard and fast, we may indeed see artificial intelligence make that decision instead. However, that is not the current plan. According to the report, Zelensky expressed reservations about following through on the operation because of the civilian risks. To be clear, Ukraine has shown a willingness to endanger civilians when the value of the target is large enough. That is why the Wildberry strikes continue. This one is different in terms of the utility of a success and the number of civilians put on the line. It also seems like a significant risk to be taking when the Kremlin is looking for an excuse to initiate a new round of mobilization. If I may draw another parallel to September 11th, one of the many reasons why bin Laden did not endear himself unto others was that the attacks killed 372 non-Americans from 102 different countries. Notably, that included 1 Russian and 1 Ukrainian. Put simply, if you start killing people at an airport, it is very difficult to confine the casualties to only Russians. As a final subthought to this point, the logic that I just described is a matter of practical strategy. Much of the commentary that I have seen from Western quarters following the report's revelation is about how such an attack would violate any number of laws of war. I think it is worth looking at this from the Ukrainian perspective. The country is past the point of caring about what some Western lawyer sitting in a legal ivory tower thinks about the situation. It has been years since there have been civilian flights inside of Ukraine, and some of their airports look like this. If the operation would be a net positive, Ukraine would go for it. It is the practical problems that have kept Ukraine off the strategy, at least for now. Moving on, I suspect that the report may shed some new light onto the palace intrigue inside of Kyiv from July. I cannot think of someone who had public opinion flip on him so quickly as what we have seen with the former Minister of Defense, Mikhailo Fedorov. It is no surprise how he became popular. The man is clearly a master of lateral thinking. If he were in charge of Ukraine, I would never run out of interesting content on this channel. Just think about all of it. The southern logistic strikes to cripple Crimea, the point system to award more equipment to Ukrainian units that destroy valuable targets, probably the Wildberry strikes, and now this operation, aside from whether it would have been a good idea or not. When Zelensky de facto sacked him, both public sentiment in Ukraine and Western commentators cried foul. From this perspective, Zelensky had made a ridiculous decision to side with old-school Soviet strategies under Syrskyi, and Fedorov's dismissal was protecting a corrupt oligarchy in the country. You might recall my commentary on the subject as it was happening, though. We did not understand all of the personal dynamics happening, and it was politically expedient to put the blame on the person asking to put more men on the front lines. However, we as outsiders do not fully grasp the trade-offs, and it was a reasonable perspective that Ukraine indeed needs to be prioritizing manpower on the front lines. Meanwhile, Fedorov had issued Zelensky an unnecessary ultimatum to either fire him or Syrskyi. Given the depiction of the situation, it is easy to understand why Zelensky would then fire Fedorov. Excellent at lateral thinking? Yes. Good at making political calculations? Not so much. To continue that theme, fast forward to the past week. Fedorov made his political power play, calling for Ukraine to run elections contrary to the Ukrainian constitution. This is where public sentiment on him flipped like a switch. Fedorov had made the situation about himself, essentially challenging Zelensky's presidency without explicitly saying as much. The reason that I am mentioning this now is that one explanation for why the airport operation got put on hold was because Fedorov was put on hold. Or at least that is how it is being presented. But to venture out into the world of speculation, it is possible that the causation here is flipped. With all his creativity, Fedorov is someone you would want to have on your team. But it is not clear that he understood his role. Just because you think that you have a clever plan does not make it a good idea. I would definitely describe the airport operation as clever. I am not sure that it is a good idea, because that involves a much larger political picture than perhaps a Minister of Defense is prepared to explore. And again, political calculations seem to be Fedorov's weak spot. Once more, this is pure speculation, but you could imagine that Fedorov kept insisting on the operation. Zelensky told him to let it go. Fedorov, in what seems to be his characteristic stubbornness, refused, and so Zelensky got rid of him. Heck, maybe even the leak is from Fedorov's team to try to force Zelensky into action. Well, that makes for an interesting segue, because I do not think that we should forever close the book on this operation. Russia is struggling with its air defenses. This would open up an entirely new can of worms for the Kremlin. Ukraine would need a way to overcome, or at least significantly mitigate the civilian casualty problem, but conditional on that, the operation has clear utility. Maybe this involves removing autonomous targeting. According to Ukraine's alleged tests, the AI has not gotten to the point where it is reliable enough. So perhaps we are looking at a situation similar to Operation Spiderweb, involving Russian SIM cards aboard the drones, which can then call back to Ukrainian pilots. I believe in Russia that SIM cards look like this, but I am not an expert on that subject. I am also not an expert on generally overcoming these logistical problems, so these questions are better left for the war planners in Kyiv. My closing thought here is that one mitigation strategy is to telegraph the attack and force an evacuation of the civilians without giving enough time to protect the infrastructure and planes. What did the leak do? A level 1 conspiracy theory is that Ukraine indeed has no desire to commit the attack for the reasons that we outlined today. Political operatives in Kyiv leaked the proposal intentionally to try to get those international companies to withdraw on their own. But a level 2 conspiracy theory is that the plan may still go forward. Later, critics can point to the report and note that those airlines continue to operate despite a public recognition of the problem. So, what are our takeaway lines for today? Ukraine had an interesting proposal to strike Russian civilian airports. For now, Ukraine has passed on the opportunity out of fear of civilian harm. But there is no saying that Ukraine will stick to that rejection in the future. Meanwhile, the opposite of the future is the past, and these two excellent books cover the past phases of how this war got started. Check the video description for more information about them. And if you enjoyed today's video, then please like, share, and subscribe, and I will see you tomorrow. Take care.